Interested in all things psychology? You are at the right place. Here, we put academics to the test and explain their cutting-edge research in just a matter of minutes. Welcome to a Very Brief Debrief.
I'm here joined today by Dr. Vanita Chamdal. Vanita is a health and well-being expert, and she's recently set up a Twitter account that's looking to advise students on simple tips to enhance and promote good well-being. So Vanita, thank you for joining me today. I believe that what you've got planned is to give me a kind of quick fire round off of sort of 3 tips that you can sort of advise students based on sort of psychological literature, sort of simple things that they might be able to do to sort of maintain sort of sound well-being throughout their academic degree. So, I wonder if maybe you could start off by, sort of suggesting your first tip.
Yeah, absolutely. The first tip, I think, is one of the most important ones, is to identify that pressure, particularly kind of that academic pressure. And that can often be seen as, or it can be kind of recognized as the demands that you can feel to achieve like a specific academic goal. And whilst stress can be motivating, it can get to a certain level where it starts increasing and it starts to kind of affect how we perceive our abilities, or it just starts giving that sense of dread, and it basically just starts getting really unhealthy. And so it's the recognition of it and identifying how that stress is starting to become, it's starting to do more harm than good, which is, and that's kind of the first tip to identify here.
So, I mean, it sounds like what you're sort of saying is the first step to kind of good well-being is just, being of your own recognition of your sort of emotions and mental state, right? That,
Right.
You, I guess, in a way, just need to be aware of when maybe something's becoming too much. As you said, sometimes stress can be, a great motivator, but sometimes it can be sort of overwhelming. So what would you suggest in those kind of cases? Would a student, let's say, they start to feel stressed in a kind of way that's, negatively impacting them, what would you suggest they do? So
at that point where a student's kind of recognizing that, okay, things, I'm starting to do that thing again when I'm stressed out, or it's starting to affect me, the way I'm living, the way I'm communicating, socializing, how I'm looking after myself or not looking after myself. And it's kind of identifying where that pressure or stress is coming from. And when that's identified, often, particularly when it's kind of during exam season or when it's kind of in the run-up of a deadline or the beginning of a new academic year or new term, it's kind of the realization of this massive kind of mountain of learning that needs to be done. And so it's that kind of massive mountain and kind of having that feeling of, I need to get this done right now in this given moment. And the term chunking is something that we kind of have all used, but it's one of the most kind of simplest but most effective ways of managing that pressure and managing those expectations of yourself. And then it will help you kind of manage that stress. So reducing it and just identifying, well, what can I do right now in this moment that's actually realistic, and focusing predominantly on that. And so it takes practice and something that can help to aid that can be creating a list, and sometimes ticking things off can help as well. So kind of chunking your tasks and chunking that kind of mountain can be really helpful. But also you can do that for your whole day as well. And the best way I can explain that is when you chunk your whole day into kind of early morning, mid-morning, early afternoon, late afternoon, and so on. And so instead of saying to yourself, right, I'm going to sit at my desk and I'm going to, learn this whole topic in the whole, all day, that your kind of attention isn't going to be great then. And so it's kind of recognizing that where your abilities are, how you perform well, and chunking your day. So I'm going to spend kind of my early afternoon just focusing on this lecture, and then I'm going to go off and do something else. So yeah, the chunking can be of the task itself, or it can be of your day.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you were sort of saying that, it struck me as how, I actually do some of those things in my everyday life. I didn't really think necessarily it might have a beneficial impact on my well-being, but now when you pointed out, it probably does. Every time I come into work in the morning, I'm kind of like, right, what am I actually going to be able to achieve today? And kind of write a list of 7 or 8 things, and they can be very kind of small. It might just be sort of uploading materials for next week's lecture or something, and it's a very small task, but it certainly makes you feel like when you leave the day, even if there were sort of 7 or 8 small tasks that you achieved, that progress was made, and you can kind of see how you're sort of chipping away at that kind of bigger thing, which as you kind of pointed out, it can be really overwhelming. Not just as a student, but obviously as a sort of staff member as well. There's a lot to get done in an academic year, and it can really overwhelm it. So kind of breaking it down is a really kind of interesting idea, and I hadn't really thought about how it could actually be really quite good for my own personal well-being. So it's an interesting one. So what's your sort of second tip then? What would be the next sort of tip you would advise students in terms of how they can promote their well-being?
Yeah, so the second one, I guess, would be integration. And what I mean by that is utilizing what you have around you to aid you and to support you. So that could be, and the example that I want to kind of expand upon with that is when you're feeling stressed out or when your well-being is kind of at risk, it can feel quite isolating. It can feel like you're the only person in that situation or feeling in that way. And whilst that emotion and journey is unique to you, you may not necessarily be alone in that, particularly when it's kind of exam season where many of your friends are going to be experiencing something similar. So it's kind of integrating yourself in the best way possible to address kind of your needs. So an example of that, I guess, could be utilizing social support. So it could be kind of buddying up with someone to revise together, to study together. It could be just dropping someone a call and saying, okay, I want to go for this walk. Are you available? Or let's meet up for coffee. But it's kind of integrating and having that social and human contact. And again, it's really simple, but it can help you kind of pull out of that isolating feeling. But then also it can help you feel connected with others as well.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, this idea. I mean, you mentioned, buddying up with someone to sort of practice, but I can even just imagine, I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but I've had that experience sometimes where, you just kind of feel like there's a task and you just can't do it for whatever reason. It's just too difficult at the moment. You can't get your head around it and it frustrates you. And sometimes the best thing just to do is just to, maybe just go out, see a friend for a coffee, hopefully if they're studying the same thing as you, you can relate and kind of share that experience, but you're not making progress on the task. But then probably strangely, when you come back and return to it, the next day or after the weekend, suddenly, you've kind of got fresh eyes at it and you can actually then start to chip away at that task. So I think that's a really interesting idea, of sometimes just, not always focusing on the task is always the best solution to actually, in the end, solve that task. Just take a step back, see a friend, maybe work with someone on it as well is a good idea too. So I think it's a really nice idea. Okay, so what about your third tip then? What's the third and final tip that you would leave us on in terms of kind of good, sound, ways to sort of enhance your well-being?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the third one would be actually learning what well-being means for you. So what I mean by that is well-being for someone could mean exercising. It could mean going for a really brisk walk or engaging in an exercise, wherever it is, whether football, netball, whatever kind of gets those natural endorphins going. But then for another person, well-being could mean certain self-care activities like practicing good sleep hygiene, meditating, creativity like drawing or painting, practicing mindfulness, for example. So it's actually understanding what well-being actually means for you, and giving yourself the opportunity to engage in that as well. Because I could sit here and say, everyone needs to start kind of practicing meditation because it worked for me. However, and this has been found within the literature base as well, that sometimes for some people, particularly when that anxiety or the stress is presenting in a very physical way, meditation can often do more harm than good. And sometimes it's better to go for that jog or do something more physical than to sit down and feel your feelings, I guess. So yes, but kind of appreciating what your well-being is and what it means for you.
Yeah, and I suppose really what you're sort of saying there, if I understand you correctly, is that, we can offer these sort of tips, but, they are at the end of the day only tips. They're not always going to work for everyone. And you kind of need to know what works for you. So I suppose, and perhaps maybe you can help me understand this, but I suppose if I was a student and you're sort of saying to me, I need to figure out what's good for my well-being, is that just a question of me asking myself, like, what makes me feel good? Is there any other kind of tips that you might be able to suggest for me identifying what works for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So it would be kind of identifying kind of the healthier things that you can engage in, as well as identifying kind of core components that are known to support well-being. So that would be what is your general lifestyle like? Are you engaging in some level of exercise, whether it is just going for a really quick walk? Are you eating well? And those elements, so kind of the physical part, as well as how are you feeling socially isolated? So you may be ticking all those boxes, but then you may live by yourself, not have any communication with anyone else, and you're not kind of integrating yourself in the community. Or it could be, well, what works for you? Do you find that being able to switch off and engage in gaming and online gaming, is that your way of being able to kind of remove yourself from that stress for that period of time that you need to? So it's kind of, I guess, unpacking moments where you feel more yourself, and also identifying them in terms of, are these healthy, and utilizing them in the way that is serving you, rather than kind of that permanent escapism that can often happen.
So your Twitter handle is Dr. Vanita C, I believe, if people can follow you on Twitter.
Yeah.
What I'll do is I'll put that in the description. So if any of you are interested in following Vanita and hearing more sort of tips, I think you'll be posting some on a regular basis. So if there are other tips that you want to hear from Vanita, do follow her on Twitter. And thank you, obviously, Vanita, for coming on today and offering some great suggestions. It was really, really insightful.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching the Psychology Debrief. If you have any suggestions for new topics, quizzes, or any other content psychology related, feel free to get in touch via email or Twitter. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Bye!